Hello and welcome to Daytime Blue Ridge. I'm Joanna Himes.
And I'm Bridget Curran. Today on the show, we're starting in the kitchen with 419 West. They're getting us ready for Easter with a special dish that you'll want to share with the whole family.
And we're also getting an inside look at Blue Ridge Hydroponics. Join us at their store as we learn how you can use their expertise and equipment to start your garden inside this spring rather than dealing with all that Mother Nature can serve up.
And we're back out at Crunch Fitness. Since I'm pregnant, I get some one-on-one help from a trainer, learn how they tailor a unique plan for me, and can do the same for you too.
Well, Easter is only a couple of days away now, so we want to know, how are you planning to celebrate this Sunday?
Yeah, are you checking out a new church, spending time with your family, or visiting the Easter Bunny somewhere? Let us know on Facebook.com/Daytime Blue Ridge.
What about you, Bridget? Where are you headed this weekend?
Oh, I don't know. I'm a loner, so I'm going to check out a church, maybe hit a brunch.
Yeah.
I don't know. We'll see.
Guys, leave her some recommendations in the comments.
And you said you're going with Lindsay in the
Yes,
comments.
my sweet dear friend Lindsay Ward has invited my family over to her church this Sunday and to have Easter dinner with her family. I think she's cooking, so we'll see how that goes. I'll be sure to update everybody on Lindsay's cooking skills.
Yep. Yeah, join the conversation on Facebook. And now we're going to send it over to Storm Team 10 meteorologist Jonathan Keggis. What are you doing for Easter?
Hey, good morning. Church, of course, and we'll figure out what's going on the rest of the afternoon. The weather's looking pretty good, though, so if you have outdoor plans, looking pretty good. Live look in Martinsville now, the sunshine breaking free again. It is warm. Temperatures back into the low 70s. Winds right now out of the south at about 5 miles an hour. Had those showers and a few thunderstorms roll through earlier this morning. That is out of here. Now we will be on the drier side for the rest of the afternoon and evening. That'll again change tomorrow. We had some of the showers and storms. It's a little cooler, only 60 in Roanoke, 63 in Blacksburg. We are at 67 in Hillsville, certainly where we were dry today, already in the mid 70s in South Boston, 74 for us. In Danville, everyone are going to get in at least on the potential for the rain tomorrow. We are going to stay windy. At least the winds are going to crank up as we go through the rest of the morning and afternoon. Also warm, as we just saw. Tomorrow, though, that's whenever that severe weather threat really starts to ramp up as we get deeper into the early part of the afternoon, mainly after lunch, and then to the rest of the evening. That's what you see right there, the darker reds on your screen. Once we get into Saturday, dynamic nature of this system is going to be a area of an upper low pressure center overhead. That's going to help to get some snow showers going, at least the potential for that, mainly into the highest elevations in Grayson County and especially into the Smokies and the mountains of North Carolina. We're going to talk all about the timing of this severe weather threat and the impacts to you coming up at noon on 10 News.
The following portion of Daytime Blue Ridge is sponsored by
We are in the daytime kitchen with our good friend Chef Ted from 419 West Restaurant. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
And it's a big weekend coming up, Easter weekend.
Absolutely.
How are you guys preparing?
Cooking a lot. So it's like I don't want to be
As
around
you
the
can
bush. Just kind
imagine.
of running up the middle. But so everybody always kind of asks me, my wife, when we go places or we talk, it's like, well, what kind of side dishes for Easter, for the holidays? And for me, I like simple. And I think this is a great thing. I always do this at home with my kids too, so my son can practice his knife skills.
Oh, okay.
Oh, wow. How old is your son?
8.
Okay.
I think it's important. Everybody should know how to cook.
Right.
Absolutely.
True.
Cutting is scary, though.
So this could be any vegetables that you like, firm root vegetables. This is rutabaga. I grabbed some carrots and some cauliflower. You could do turnips. It could be radishes. It could be anything under the sun.
And so we're chopping these up into like what size for this specific
whenever you
recipe?
chop it up, you just want to make sure it's consistent. And that's the biggest part of knife skills. You know, you want to make sure it's consistent so it all cooks the
Evenly.
same.
Absolutely.
So whether they're squares.
All right, Ted, I'm sorry I got to cut you off. Unfortunately, we do
all
have a
right.
special report coming down from NBC on the Mueller report, so we're going to toss over to that.
It's all right.
Here we go, Ted. We can do.
In length, not counting exhibits and other documents, and it is now live. It's public. We will put it on NBCnews.com, and as we go along this morning, we'll be reading it along with you. We already know the top-line legal conclusions here. Number one, there was no finding of conspiracy on the part of the Trump campaign or President Trump himself to conspire with the Russians to meddle in our elections, and we know that the Attorney General took the evidence that was provided by Robert Mueller and made a legal conclusion that there was not sufficient evidence for obstruction obstruction of justice. Earlier today, we heard from the Attorney General himself as he discussed some of the reasons for his findings. He also talked about some of the redactions, which is a fancy legal term for saying some of this report will be blacked out for a variety of reasons, ongoing investigations, classified information, grand jury material, but that he said he had sought to release as much as possible. And now the report is being released publicly, and it's also going to Capitol Hill.
Yeah, and what is happening in this news conference today, William Barr laying out a very strong case of vindication for President Trump if you just base it on his words and what he talked about today. Now come the details. Finally, we will have a look inside as to what the Mueller report says to the extent that we can, with the knowledge that some of this is redacted for various reasons that have been laid out over the last several days. But we will particularly want to hone in on the whole decision not to pursue obstruction of justice charges. We understand this document will list some of the areas that would point to potentially obstruction of justice and the view from the special counsel on why he simply couldn't come to a decision.
A lot of open questions. As I said, we have those top-line legal conclusions. We don't know, for example, why Robert Mueller chose not to render a legal judgment. This was an investigation that went on nearly 2 years. There were 23 months, 500 search warrants, 2,300 subpoenas, several guilty pleas, trials that are stemming from this report. We will find out now what the underlying evidence is. I believe Kristen Welker is at the White House. The president's getting ready, Kristen, to have an event unrelated to this. He may make remarks on this, but what is the White House view of what they've heard so far from the Attorney General?
Well, so far you have the president essentially claiming victory. Savannah, he tweeted out "game over" against a Game of Thrones backdrop. And the reason for that is because you have the Attorney General Bill Barr, who held that press conference and essentially said that there was no determination of no collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. There was no evidence of criminal obstruction. So from President Trump's perspective, he is going to continue to argue that that's total vindication. And the president's legal team already out saying that this is essentially a slam dunk for them. But of course, the devil is going to be in the details, because Barr also said that Mueller was looking at 10 potential examples of possible obstruction. And so I've been talking to some of the president's allies who say that's where their focus is going to be right now. Savannah, I know the president's about to start talking.
Yeah, he's making some remarks at this Wounded Warrior event. Let's listen and see if he talks about it.
Thrilled to host the Wounded Warrior Project. It's been a long relationship I've had, and the Soldier Ride is something very, very special. Few people could do it, including me. I hate to admit it. I hate to admit that, General, but including me. We're deeply honored to be in the presence of true American heroes. I want to thank our great Vice President.
We're going to continue to listen to this event, and if he remarks anything about the Mueller report, we will certainly bring it to you. But as mentioned, the Department of Justice, at long last, has put on its website this actual report, and our reporter, our correspondent, Pete Williams, has been looking at it. I hope you're a speed reader, Pete, but what are you seeing so far?
Well, let me start out with a dramatic moment, according to the special counsel report, when the president was told on May 17th that this whole process of the special investigation would be started with the appointment of Robert Mueller. I'm going to read from a portion of the report that describes that moment in the Oval Office. It says, when the president was told a special counsel had been appointed, the president slumped back in his chair and said, "Oh my God, this is terrible. This is the end of my presidency. I am..." And then he used a form of a word that begins with F. "I am effed." The president became angry and lambasted the Attorney General for his decision to recuse from the investigation, saying to Jeff Sessions, according to this summary, "How could you let this happen, Jeff? You were supposed to protect me." And then, according to this summary from Robert Mueller, he said to people in the room, "Everyone tells me if you get one of these independent counsels, it ruins your presidency. It takes years and years, and I won't be able to do anything. This is the worst thing that ever happened to me," close quote, according to the Mueller report. The president then told Sessions, according to the report, that he should resign as Attorney General. And in fact, according to the investigation, Jeff Sessions did submit a letter of resignation, but that was never accepted by the president. Now, the report goes on to say that at one point, there were press reports that then White House counsel Don McGahn was directed to fire the special counsel, Robert Mueller, and that the president urged White House officials to tell McGahn to deny this. But according to what was said in this report, McGahn said he wouldn't do that, and said McGahn told officials that the media reports were accurate in stating that the president had directed McGahn to have the special counsel removed. And of course, obviously that never happened. Now, let me just give you some overall, step back from that dramatic thing a little bit and give you some overall sense of how the special counsel report is put together. I'm going to direct you to there. It's in 2 volumes, and we've been handed these 2 volumes in 3-ring binders. And I think one question that people may have is, how heavily redacted is the report? Section 2, which deals with the investigations of potential obstruction of justice, as you can see, is very lightly redacted. But the other 3-ring binder that we've been given, Section 1, does have more extensive redactions. Here, example, is a page of what one of these pages looks like. So the Section 1 part about the investigation of Russian meddling into the election has more redactions, and they relate to, in many cases, harm. They say harm to an ongoing matter. As you may recall, this is one of the categories that Attorney General William Barr had said would be used to redact some of the report that is going to the public, although he said this morning that members of Congress would be able to see that. Now, on the question of obstruction of justice, the report said that it looked at several actions by the president as potential actions of obstruction of justice, and many of them we were familiar with. The dinner with Comey, the firing of Comey, the dinner in which he asked for Comey's loyalty in January of 2017, the meeting in which he asked Comey to go easy on Flynn. The report says that the president did not know about Flynn's discussions with the Russian ambassador at the time they were made, and was only told about it when the Justice Department told the White House of what he was up to. And it also says that as they analyzed that issue as a potential obstruction of justice, just to give you an indication of the kind of thinking that Mueller says went into his decisions about whether to say actions constituted obstruction of justice, the report says that the president never connected in his mind Flynn's discussion with the Russian ambassador with what the president called, according to the report, the Russia thing. In other words, the special counsel's investigation of the president's conduct and the campaign's conduct. It also talks about the Mueller team looked at the president's request to Comey repeatedly to say that the president wasn't the subject of an FBI investigation and to lift what the president regarded as a cloud. And I should say, by the way, that the report basically accepts James Comey's versions in every instance of his interactions with the president that was memorialized in Mr. Comey's memos with the meetings with the president. It talks about another potential issue of obstruction of justice that was investigated by Mueller was the president's outreach to the intelligence community, to the director of national intelligence, the director of the NSA and the CIA about the Russia investigation, the president's rationales for firing Comey, and the president's involvement in issuing a statement, and this has been much reported and debated about the infamous June 9th, 2016 meeting in Trump Tower between Russians and senior Trump campaign officials. You'll recall that the president was involved in setting up an email about that was supposedly about adoption, and admitted the fact that the Russians had offered to provide the Trump campaign with what they called dirt on Hillary Clinton. Some other facts that were in the Mueller report is the discussion here about why they decided to leave it open about whether these actions amounted to obstruction of justice. And among the factors they considered, they said the president had the authority to fire James Comey because he's the head of the executive branch. He could do that. And some evidence, the report says, indicates that the president wanted to protect himself from an investigation of his campaign, but, the report says, the evidence does not establish that the firing was intended to cover up any kind of conspiracy between the Trump campaign and Russia. Now, a couple of other notes, and let me just then pause and catch my breath. Mueller believed that he had the authority to subpoena the president. He concluded that was a legal question about whether somebody in his position could, in fact, legally put the president to a subpoena, and concluded that he did have the legal authority to do so, but decided that the negotiations were so protracted that it would happen at a very late stage, and by then the investigation already knew enough based on what had been publicly stated. Now, there's an appendix to those two notebooks that I showed you. This appendix with that we got in our copy of the binder in it, and one of the things it has in it is the president's written answers to the questions from Mueller. And I haven't had a chance to go through that yet, but we are going to get the full copy of the written answers to the questions that the president gave him.
Pete, let me ask you, and let you catch your breath for a moment. This is amazing you're able to digest this so quickly, but let's talk about, so there's no interview with the president. They thought they had the right to subpoena and didn't. Is there any talk about how they gleaned intent or no intent?
Yes, based on his conversations with other people, his actions. They say, for example, Lester, that his actions toward the special counsel shifted after his early alarm that I read you that very dramatic account about. After he was initially told about the special counsel, he sort of laid back and let Mueller do his thing. But then, when it became clear that to the president that he himself was under investigation for obstruction of justice, the report says the president's tone changed. He began to tweet about Mueller and about his investigators, to criticize the attack. That's with the beginning of the infamous string of witch hunt attacks, an attack which continued all the way up apparently until today. And that's one factor that they looked at. But what they came down is they said for everything that they looked at, the president either had the authority to do it or the intent wasn't clear enough. And they hang their hat a lot on the fact that it didn't appear that he was trying to cover up some crime. In other words, having concluded that there was no collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia, having concluded that the president didn't do anything wrong, they said that's a factor we have to consider. Now, there is an interesting discussion, and let me see if I can find it. There's an interesting discussion, I think, in some of the loose pages that I pulled out of there, Charlie, about the fact that they looked at whether they could charge the president with obstruction, and they can. I don't find it right here, but my recollection is that they concluded that they actually probably could charge the president with obstruction because it was not a crime that was directed at his ability to do the job or his official functions in office. So they basically say that it was not a showstopper for them, the Justice Department's longstanding policy under both Republicans and Democrats that you can't indict a sitting president. That, they say, was not a concern because they actually not only got past that constitutional problem, but decided they probably could charge the president with obstruction if they thought the evidence was there. Now, they
just
don't
so people
say
understand that, I just want to pause you right there because I don't want people to misunderstand. Sure. They're saying, we all know the Department of Justice has a rule that says you can't indict a sitting president, but what you read in the report is that the Mueller team found that was not an impediment, that if they had had the factual basis, they would have gone ahead and charged, as I understand you saying it, but they found they did not have sufficient factual basis. Is that correct?
Correct. That was, in other words, it wasn't that they thought that if he was anybody else, they could have charged him with a crime, but because he's the president, they couldn't. That was not the thinking. Okay.
I noticed, I'm looking, we're trying to read along with you, just so you can catch your breath, Pete, too. But I'm noticing that with regard to the collusion part, the conspiracy part of this report, it does say that there is not sufficient evidence to establish a crime, but it does say that there were the investigation identifies numerous links between individuals with ties to the Russian government and individuals associated with the Trump campaign, but it says the evidence was not sufficient to support criminal charges. And then it gets into some of the technical legal statutes, which is, what the prosecutor is asked to do, not just to look at the facts, but also to see if there's a crime that could be established by those facts if they meet the technical aspects of the statute. We're all going to law school here today. Yep, go ahead, Pete.
Sure. Let me just back up on this section we just talked about, because I've just found the section that discusses this. It says the Department of Justice and the president's counsel have recognized that the president is subject to statutes that prohibit obstruction of justice by bribing a witness or suborning perjury, because that conduct does not implicate his constitutional authority. So, in other words, it was doubly not a showstopper for them. Not only were they aware of the Justice Department policy, but they also said they separately concluded, and the president's counsel agreed, that a president could be subject to a charge of obstruction of justice. But again, they just found that the evidence didn't meet it. Now, a couple of other little tidbits from the report that I've seen in the brief time I've had to look through it. You'll recall that there was, and this remains controversial to this day, early on in the investigation, the FBI got this dossier from a person who had done work for British intelligence, and one of the allegations in it was that there was a compromising, salacious videotape. This was the allegation that was made when the president was in a hotel room in Moscow, a conduct that involved some women. According to the report, a Russian businessman told Michael Cohen, who was then, at that time, the president's well-regarded personal lawyer, about the Moscow tapes. But this Russian businessman told the investigators that the tapes were fake, but had never told Cohen about that.
And Pete, I want to go back to something that, excuse me, William Barr said in his news conference. He says the special counsel's report acknowledges that there was evidence to show the president was frustrated by his belief that the investigation was undermining his presidency, propelled by political opponents, and fueled by illegal leaks. Were those Barr's words, or were they actually referred to in this report?
That is a summary. You know, I have to say that the way Barr described what he called the top line or bottom line conclusions of the Mueller investigation tracks very closely with what I've been able to read. His summary of what the investigation says is pretty much on point here, I think, Lester. And by the way, you know, you come up in this report because one of the things that Mueller looked at, as I think is pretty well known, is the interview the president gave with you, in which he said that one of his motivations for firing James Comey was the Russia thing.
I am sure that all
Americans. That was one of the factors that the independent counsel or the special counsel looked at.
All right, Pete, hang there. I know you're going to continue to read. We have the benefit of some great legal analysts at our table. We have Danny Savalos here and Neil Katyal, the former Solicitor General, acting Solicitor General of the U.S., and I know you both are looking at it. I see it on your screen. What pops out so far?
Well, Savannah, it's been 22 minutes since the report's come out, and I do think that's really important. This is a 400-page report. All Americans need to pause, read the thing, and then dissect it. There are a couple of things that stand out to me right away. Number one, Mueller goes through 10 different episodes of possible obstruction of justice. And so far, I haven't read anything that said he concluded there was nothing there, that there was no crime or anything like that. Rather, after discussing the 10 episodes, Mueller then goes through a whole explanation of why the president's legal theories are wrong. He says that they, quote, lack merit and that they're contrary to the litigating position of the Department of Justice. And so I suspect what happened here, but again, we have to read the report to figure it out, is when it comes to that key obstruction of justice investigation, Mueller couldn't resolve it one way or the other because he wanted Congress to. That's, after all, what his predecessors did, Leon Jaworski in Watergate, Ken Starr in the Lewinsky investigation.
Is it clear that he wanted Congress?
It's not clear. He doesn't say anything one way or the other, but when you're writing this report, if you're a special counsel and you know, well, what have my predecessors done? Well, they haven't resolved it, even with Nixon, where the evidence was overwhelming. And Mueller's writing against the backdrop of that history. And so he doesn't resolve it. He leaves it for Congress. And it's Barr who comes in and inserts himself into the process and flips it.
Is it possible, though, that Mueller, operating under different statutes than those other counsels, thought the Attorney General, he's leaving it for somebody to decide, it's not going to be him, operating under the statute that I believe you helped write? Is it possible he thought, no, the Attorney General should render this judgment?
No, I don't think so, because the special counsel regulations that we wrote in 1999, which governed Mueller, were actually patterned on Leon Jaworski. So I don't think that they're different. And I think for, if Mueller's writing this, he's going to say the most obvious precedent is what my predecessors have done.
And from a legal standpoint, 10 items of potential obstruction, does the number change the ultimate conclusion? 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10?
Well, I mean, legally, I don't think it does, but I think practically it does. I mean, this is a really remarkable thing to have a sitting president have 10 different episodes of possible obstruction of justice. That just shows where the bar has moved away from past presidents.
But again, the question of intent looms large.
Absolutely. And so under an obstruction of justice investigation, you have to prove a corrupt intent. And what it looks like, and again, we're just starting to look at this, but it looks like Barr decided, well, you have to have some sort of underlying crime in order for there to be obstruction of justice. It can't simply be you obstruct something, an investigation into something unrelated that isn't itself a crime.
And we should note to folks that a lot of our pages look like this, probably not as heavily redacted as many people expected, but
I think Pete pointed out, and it certainly seems to be the case, that the first part of the report, which has to do with this issue of conspiracy and also the Russians' efforts to meddle in our election, those seem to be more redacted, which makes sense. You're more likely to see classified information, the kind of thing.
And they list them here. It says a harm to an ongoing matter.
The rationale for why things are blacked out.
Yeah.
Danny, you're reading it there as well. What pops out?
What pops out is, as many have suspected, from the early parts of the investigation, Mueller concluded that he cannot charge a sitting president based on that OLC opinion, and that guided his decision to not make a prosecutorial decision, because what prosecutors do is they allege that people committed a crime, and then we have an adversarial process that allows them to tell their side of the story. That never would have been available here, and consequently, because President Trump would not have the opportunity to defend himself if Mueller simply made a conclusion that he committed a crime without being able to charge him, that justified not making a prosecutorial decision.
It's interesting because I thought Pete, I don't know if Pete's still with us, I thought Pete saw in a section that wasn't necessarily the determinative issue, that actually they had kind of overcome that hurdle, so to speak, Pete, this issue of the OLC guidance. I'm confused.
That's my reading of it, yes.
Okay, well, you know what? This is to Neil Katyal's point, Professor Katyal, you do have to actually read the report, and we're all in this together trying to piece it together as best we can and determine what it was. I mean, there is this guidance out there that the Department of Justice and Robert Mueller, being an employee of the Department of Justice, would have abided by. Pete has read a section of the report that suggests that they felt it does not extend to an obstruction type crime, that it can't possibly mean that. It seems like that was a legal judgment they made.
Absolutely. The president's lawyers evidently went to Mueller and said, you can't apply the obstruction of justice statutes to us as a constitutional matter. You'll restrict the president's power. And that, by the way, was the argument made in that silly 19-page memo that Bill Barr wrote last summer. And the Mueller team obviously rejected that. That's one thing that's in the report, in which they're saying, no, a president can't obstruct justice. It's not interfering with his constitutional responsibilities.
Which it's worth. I'm just looking ahead here. They talk about the Trump Tower meeting, and that they spoke with every participant except Veselitskaya and Donald Trump Jr., who declined to be voluntarily interviewed by the office.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the questions that loomed over this. Who had been interviewed, who asserted their Fifth Amendment, who was not subpoenaed. And, of course, the biggest question of all was, and perhaps answered in these pages, is why Mueller did not pursue a sit-down interview with President Trump. He did accept written answers to questions, but chose not to subpoena him and go into the legal fight that would have ensued.
And that's what I found so interesting about Barr's press conference earlier, which is a very unusual thing for a sitting attorney general to do in advance of the report coming out. But he said, well, I don't think there was intent because Donald Trump was, quote, frustrated. And
as I said during my Senate confirmation hearing and since, I'm committed to ensuring the greatest degree possible of transparency concerning the special counsel's investigation, consistent with the law.
Americans will be asking.
Let's go back to Pete Williams, who has continued to read ahead of us, and we need a breath here for a second. What more do you see there?
Well, let's dip into volume 1 a little bit, which is the investigation of whether any members of the Trump campaign illegally were involved with the Russians in helping them meddle, and we know the conclusion was that they didn't, but let me just read a little of this to you. It says the investigation identified numerous links between individuals, and if you want to follow along with me, I'll tell you this is volume 1, page 9. This is the third full paragraph. While the investigation identified numerous links between individuals with ties to the Russian government and individuals associated with the Trump campaign, the evidence wasn't sufficient to support criminal charges. For example, it says the evidence wasn't sufficient to charge any campaign official as an unregistered agent of the Russian government or any other Russian principal. And as for that June 9, 2016 meeting and the WikiLeaks releases of hacked materials, the evidence wasn't sufficient to charge a criminal campaign finance violation. And it says also, the evidence wasn't sufficient to charge that any member of the Trump campaign conspired with representatives of the Russian government to interfere in the 2016 election. So that's a key sentence out of Volume 1. Now, it does go on to say that several people identified with the Trump campaign lied to the special counsel and lied to Congress about their interactions with Russian-affiliated people and related matters. And of course, we're familiar with the ones that were charged: Papadopoulos, Flynn, Cohen, and Manafort, and most recently Roger Stone, charged with lying to the investigation as well.
All right, Pete, stand by there. We have the president's personal attorney, Jay Sekulow, who has the advantage of having seen this actually, I think, on Tuesday, Jay.
Hey, Savannah.
Yeah, hi, good to see you. So
You too.
people are just trying to ingest this.
Sure.
What's your understanding?